And thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, the Supreme Court hears a case on whether a Christian flag can be banned from a special flagpole at Boston City Hall, where other flags representing other causes have also been flown. The United Nations creating a special permanent commission of inquiry to investigate one country, Israel. Plus, they're called grooming gangs, and they prey on young girls in the UK, trading them for sex.
In one or two cities, we know there's at least 1,000 victims. So that's many thousands of victims, and many of these victims have been raped and abused by more than one abuser.
We'll explore what's behind these gangs and why some say police are afraid to put a stop to this. And then later,
this is the day that the Lord has made, and I ain't gonna let it slip away.
Dante's solo bow. We share the story behind Dante Bow's music.
I was asking God, like, pretty much, why would he allow me to go through this?
All these stories and more are coming up next.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
And we begin this half hour with this question. Can a flag, a Christian flag, be banned from a special flagpole outside Boston City Hall? That was the case before the U.S. Supreme Court Tuesday. Boston says it can choose not to speak on the subject of religion, while the plaintiff says the flagpole is a public forum, and so the city violated the Constitution by discriminating against a religious viewpoint. Caitlin Burke has our report.
The key to this whole case is determining whose voice the flagpole represents, the government's or private citizens. Now, justices really grilled the attorney representing Boston on that question.
When you say anybody can speak by putting up a flag, with these few exceptions, are you not creating a forum for private speech rather than speaking your own mind?
No, Your Honor, I do believe that the fact that we're talking about the government's own flagpole in front of the government's seat of power, where governments have historically spoken, it's the government's bully pulpit. Everyone would think that is the government speaking.
There are 3 flagpoles outside of Boston City Hall. One flies the American flag, another that of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The third flagpole is meant to celebrate other countries, cultures, and causes. Private organizations simply have to apply to have their banner raised. While the city may have viewed that third flagpole as representing the government's voice, the plaintiff's attorney said its website conveyed a different message.
And the policies specifically written by the city for the 2005 to 2017 include the statement that these are public forums open to all applicants.
Matt Staver with the Liberty Council represents Hal Shurtleff. Shurtleff is the director of Camp Constitution, an organization that applied to fly a Christian flag in honor of Constitution Day. Their request was rejected.
After 12 years with 284 flag-raising approvals, no denials, and usually no review, one word caught the attention of a Boston official, the word Christian on the application.
Staver calls this a case of viewpoint discrimination, accusing the city of using its argument of government speech as a guise for censorship.
Can't the government choose what it wants to say? And if the government makes it clear and it's not, just stamping government speech on it to hide discrimination against private viewpoints, but if the government truly exercises control, wouldn't that be okay?
If the government truly exercised control. Other cities don't open for third-party flags for obvious reasons. Those that do can invite some third-party participation as long as they maintain very specific control of the subject matters and messages, and that it's very clear that it is their speech.
While Boston argued there were clear parameters of the flags it would allow to represent the city, ultimately, the justices expressed that it seemed officials were operating off the belief that allowing a religious flag to fly outside City Hall would be unconstitutional, and that was a mistake.
But in the context of a system where flags go up, flags go down, different people have different kinds of flags, then it is a violation of the free speech part of the First Amendment and not an Establishment Clause violation. The end.
Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Boston suspended its flagpole program in 2021 pending a decision from the High Court. The attorney representing the city says officials intend to clarify its policies going forward, explicitly stating the flagpole represents government speech. President Biden is holding a news conference today to mark the end of his first year in office. Although he began his term well in the polls, his approval rating has plunged in recent months. With inflation at its highest level in 40 years and COVID still spreading throughout the country. For the first time ever, the United Nations General Assembly has established a permanent commission of inquiry into one of its member states, Israel. Chris Mitchell brings us this report from Jerusalem.
The unprecedented UN decision puts Israel under almost perpetual investigation, covering sovereign Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza.
I'm not aware of a commission of inquiry at the Human Rights Council that has been unlimited.
Hillel Neuer, head of UN Watch, says the idea for the commission started during Israel's war with Hamas last May.
You have the UN dedicating millions of dollars to targeting one single country, Israel. And keep in mind, this is not something to support peace, human rights, or justice. This is something to empower Hamas. We've seen it before. Hamas is the first supporter of these commissions of inquiry.
After the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, the UN held an urgent session, but declined to adopt a commission of inquiry into the Taliban's human rights abuses, affecting hundreds of thousands of Afghans. This commission is one of a kind.
It is unlimited in its scope. It has budgeted for millions of dollars. It's unique in that regard. It is going to look both at the hostilities that happened in May, but also at so-called systematic discrimination, which we know for certain, I would say, that they intend to be accusing Israel of the blood libel of apartheid, to accuse Israel alone of being a racist state.
Neuer believes those appointed to the commission expose its bias.
The chair of the inquiry is Navi Pillay. She was the former UN human rights chief. She has said that Israel treats international law with, quote, perpetual disdain. She has also accused Israel of being an apartheid state. So she's meant to be the impartial chair of this inquiry. It's a farce.
The commission must submit a report each year to the Human Rights Council and General Assembly. While the U.S. voted against the resolution, the Biden administration has rejoined the Human Rights Council after the Trump administration pulled out. Neuer says the U.S. has an opportunity.
We hope that they will call out the absurdity of members on the council like Cuba, China, Russia, Venezuela. Most of these countries have never had a single investigation or inquiry. That's wrong. The U.S. needs to take leadership. We need to press our representatives, our president, our secretaries of state to speak out and stand up for the right thing.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
California's Department of Education has agreed to remove 2 religious chants from a state-approved curriculum following a lawsuit filed by the Equal Rights Foundation, individual taxpayers, and concerned parents. The lawsuit was filed after concerned citizens discovered the curriculum included prayer to Aztec gods, the same ones who were invoked when the Aztecs worshipped them with human sacrifices. Coming up, they are called grooming gangs preying on young girls and trading them for sex. See what's behind these heinous crimes when we come back. A warning, the report you're about to see is disturbing. Grooming gangs stalk the streets from London to Vienna to Stockholm. Who are they? Mostly Muslim men who drug, rape, and beat young European women and sell them for sex. So how long has this been going on? For more than 40 years. And why are public officials afraid to put a stop to them? Our George Thomas has the answer.
Hundreds, perhaps thousands of young women have been drugged, raped and beaten across dozens of UK cities by men belonging to so-called grooming gangs.
They're gangs of men who groom young teenage girls and abuse them for sex and end up, in some cases, imprisoning them and passing them around lots of other guys and lots of other people, even selling them for sex. And these girls get abused for many years.
The problem not only continues, it's getting worse. December 2020, British authorities charged 32 men in a grooming gang with 200 sexual exploitation offenses against 8 girls, some as young as 13.
Arrests and prosecutions have happened around 40 different cities across the country. In one or two cities, we know there's at least 1,000 victims. So that's many thousands of victims. And many of these victims have been raped and abused by more than one abuser as well. So the scale of the problem is massive.
Most perpetrators convicted so far are reportedly Muslim. The majority of their victims are white.
My story started over 20 years ago. I was targeted in my late teens.
At the time, Ella Hill, not her real name, was living in Rotherham, north of London, when targeted by a Pakistani Muslim grooming gang and
raped, beaten, strangled, suffocated, tortured, almost drowned to death, suffocated to death, really, really brutally harmed, covered in bruises.
Hill said it was made clear to her by her attackers that because she was white, a non-Muslim, a virgin, and didn't dress modestly, that she deserved to be punished. She was reportedly raped over 100 times and endured what she says was religiously sanctioned sexual violence and torture.
People need to hear it from survivors that these are racially and religiously aggravated crimes. That when I was being beaten, I was being called a white slag, a white whore, a white that over and over again, the references to my whiteness was always at the forefront of my perpetrator's mind, and that was always linked in with religion and his idea of what a good Muslim was and a bad non-Muslim was.
She escaped a year later, becoming part of the UK's largest ever child sexual abuse investigation. More than 20 years later, these same assaults in European cities are only getting worse.
I want to turn now to George Thomas again for more in-depth insight on these grooming gangs. He shares exactly how these gangs groom young women and why the authorities are reluctant to crack down on the predators.
There's a three-step process. It begins with the so-called hooks. These are young, good-looking boys between the ages of 16 and 18 who look out for girls between the ages of 12 to 15. And the idea is that either in the high school or on the streets or shopping mall, in the supermarkets and so forth. And the idea is to get their phone number, to charm them into getting their phone number. Once they get the phone number, they get passed on to the so-called predators. And these are men who generally are between 19 to 22, 23 years old. And then once they get the phone numbers, they invite these girls to parties. At the parties, there's a lot of drinking, a lot of drugs. Once that is established, they are then passed on to the so-called coordinators. These are men who are, young adults to older men who wine and dine these girls. And then eventually they rope them in with gifts and charming words and so forth. And according to the experts in all of these cities around Europe, there are, these men, sometimes these girls are kidnapped, they are taken away for, years, they go missing, white vans that pop up all over the cities, and in the process they get kidnapped. Women are completely veiled, they're completely covered. Then they come to these liberal European cities and say they see women dressed in all the ways that they do. They're very free, they can say anything, go anywhere, and they're culturally shocked. And some of them, not all of them, the experts say, begin to behave very, very badly. And the problem is these European governments just cannot bring themselves together to address the issue of immigration, talk about the connection between immigration and Islam.
Thank you, George. Still ahead, he's nominated multiple times at the Grammy Awards this year. We're sitting down with Dante Bowe of Maverick City Music and Bethel Music to find out the life story behind the lyrics. It's all coming up next. The Recording Academy has announced a new date and new location for this year's Grammy Awards. Instead of the end of this month in Los Angeles, they will now take place April 3rd in Las Vegas. And at these awards, Dante Bowe is making history as a solo artist with multiple nominations. In fact, in one category, he is nominated 3 times.
This is the date that the Lord has made, and I ain't gonna let it slip away. I'm gonna be joyful. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I'm gonna be joyful.
calling this your most powerful career year yet. How would you describe this year?
I just feel like I'm walking in the promises of God and just all the things that I was prophesied, when I was younger and spoken over by my grandma, my mom, my dad. I just feel like it's coming into fruition. So I just feel, I'm walking in these promises.
So fast, life comes and goes. Make it last, best slow your roll.
The worship stuff is really inspired by mostly like my grandparents and their walk and that kind of sound. I guess I adopted from them. I would be in the car listening to Ty Tribbett and Yolanda Adams and CeCe Winans with my grandmother. So I adopted that worship, but then with my parents, she'd be playing like Aretha Franklin and all that. And so I think Circles was a lot of just soul undertones and R&B undertones.
Now, could you always sing, or were you?
I could always sing.
Mm-hmm.
I was a sneaky singer. So like, whenever my parents would be gone from home, I would sing out loud, or whenever I was in the shower, I would like hum on key. Anytime I was outside of those elements, I would fake sing because I was so nervous for people to hear my actual voice. And so my grandmother heard me one day and was like, "What?" And so then I became a singer that day.
So you go from small town, and we sit here today, and you're actually making history at the Grammy Awards, being nominated in gospel and Christian at the same time.
Why?
God still provide.
I found myself asking God all the time, who am I? Not even like spiritually, like a son I know, and I'm chosen, I'm called, predestined, but other than that, like, who am I practically to people? Because I don't think I know who I am or my impact. I don't understand my impact. Even up into the Grammys. It's just the Lord showing me that, you're not in control, I'm in control, and whatever I want for your life will happen.
And there was never a moment when you left me alone.
Is it true to say that 3 years ago you were homeless?
Yeah, I was. And then I moved to Columbus, and then I started living in a trailer that my pastor was paying for. And I wrote a lot of my songs in that trailer.
Things do get better, and they lied when they said it won't.
I was so depressed, so miserable, because I'm like, this is never gonna happen for me. Because I had been singing for like 7 years prior, trying to do music, and it was just not doing it. And then Circles was the one we were like, okay, finally.
Now, I'm told you also dealt with trauma.
Probably the one you're talking about is just me being molested at a young age and going through sexual abuse, and then having to navigate through my sexuality through, that whole season, and, the Lord bringing me out on the other side of that. Even that is crazy in and of itself. Me and my grandmother just talked about it at the Dove Awards. I took my grandmother to the Dove Awards with me, and we went to breakfast, and she was like, she brought it up. And then we talked about it.
Papa could see the person I've become.
So in talking about it with God, was there any blaming God or asking God why, or how could you let this happen?
There was a few times I did ask God why. The trauma had already happened. So that was I was asking God, like, pretty much, why would you allow me to go through this? This is horrible, you know what I mean? Like, the aftermath is horrible. You know what I mean? Obviously the act is too, but the aftermath is even longer. I never really blamed him though, because I just, he was with me. He kind of like helped me get through it.
Mom and Dad were drug dealers?
They were drug dealers. I didn't know they were drug dealers until about 12 years old, and I think I just saw it when they was like, what in the world? They ended up stopping, when I was 16 years old. I was going to church every Sunday. I ended up getting saved, and my mom got saved when I was 16. We ended up reading the Bible together, and she met Jesus when I was 16.
You going on tour?
I'm going on tour. I'm doing a tour with Four Kingdom Countries, a joint tour, and I'm very, very excited about that. And then I'm doing a Dante Bowe tour, Circles tour. Really
Dante Bowe Circles tour. How does that feel?
I don't know yet. Even us dreaming it up is like, is this really gonna happen? People really gonna show up to this? You know what I mean? So I'm excited just to see, I guess, what happens.
The Academy postponed this year's Grammy Awards because of COVID, but when they are handed out in April in Las Vegas, I've got a hunch Dante Bowe will be taking home at least one award and quite possibly a lot more. To see more uplifting stories like this, you can watch Studio 5 this evening at 8:30 Eastern on the CBN News Channel. You can also catch it on the CBN News app. Coming up, a pastor's lost Bible brought someone into a relationship with Christ. Find out more about this heartwarming story when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Pastor Paul Daugherty of the megachurch Victory in Tulsa, Oklahoma, lost his Bible 15 years ago, but is now overjoyed it was actually used to bring someone to Christ. He says a man named Clayton found the Bible at a shelter 10 years ago and started reading it. The Bible was filled with highlights and notes, which he says Clayton loved just as much as he loved the scriptures. Clayton surrendered his life to Christ and came to Victory Church last weekend. Pastor Daugherty realized that was his Bible when Clayton showed him at the church. The pastor says God used his old, messy, scribbled-in Bible to save and set free Clayton's life. Now, you can get more on this heartwarming story by visiting us at cbnnews.com. Time now for your Wednesday word, and today's word is joyful. We heard Dante Bowe sing about it, but know this: your joy is not like happiness. It does not depend on what is happening. Your joy is in the Lord, and He is God, regardless of what's happening, good or bad. With that word, I encourage you to make this a wonderful Wednesday and be sure to have yourself a wonderful rest of the week. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN News Watch, but you can always find more of our programs on the CBN News Channel. You can find them there at any time as well as online at cbnnews.com. Let us know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us. The address is right there at the bottom of the screen, newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We look forward to seeing you right back here, same time tomorrow. Goodbye. God bless.